Okay, let's begin with former President Donald Trump, currently at his Mar-a-Lago, Florida estate, and preparing to make his initial court appearance just hours from now in Miami. The 45th president of the United States, becoming the first former president to face federal charges. He's facing 37 counts relating to his handling of classified documents. He's expected to be arraigned and to plead not guilty to all of those counts when he appears today in the Miami courtroom. That could also happen to be if they decide to make it a separate arraignment that would be more private. We'll find out. But meanwhile, Trump will also be electronically fingerprinted today. A source tells Fox News not to expect a mugshot, and he will not be handcuffed. Reporters will be barred from using cameras or phones inside the courtroom. At today's proceedings, the judge will likely set bail and schedule the next court hearing. The former president is then expected to head back to his estate in Bedminster, New Jersey, and make some remarks this evening. Douglas, so a little bit different than what we saw here in New York. And again, the Secret Service would make the determination originally if we would see him in cuffs and all of that. I would think that that's continuing to happen at this point.
Yeah, they seem to be negotiating about it still. We were on together when Trump took off from Mar-a-Lago for the hearing in New York. I have to say, I do think this feels different. You know, I think there's no doubt that there's a political persecution going on, that there is definitely a sort of get Trump thing. However, what has come out in recent days about some of the papers stored at Mar-a-Lago, and specifically this issue of the audio recording of the former president saying these are secret documents, etc., etc., that is a real problem for him, I would think. And I don't know how he's going to address it if he does address it this evening. But that's a serious one.
You know what's interesting? I don't know if you caught in Politico Playbook today, Tammy, but there's a fascinating article. And Timothy Palatore, who left the Trump team just last month, came up with this 5-tiered plan. I ran it past Brett Tolman on my hour last on Focus. And there are some interesting things that they can do to fight back. First of all, pursue aggressive discovery. We know that that can really be a game change because usually it's the prosecutors who decide what gets into the case. Now the defense will get to decide too, and they literally could ask for everything.
They could, and there's many different things we have to just remember. Of course, this indictment was written by people who want to get Trump, right? Every indictment looks horrible, and it's done that way for a reason. At the same time, as Douglas has noted, this, of course, it's the federal government, which in and of itself makes it serious. And what you don't want to do when you're someone like Trump, when you know when they've already lied about you, the government has done amazing things to try to get you, don't give them a place where they can hang their hat. I mean, that's the problem here. So we've not heard his response yet in how you deal with something like this. We do know that others have not been prosecuted for things that seem to be similar. All of that we're certainly going to hear about. But I do think that their interest is in not having a trial before the election. It's about drawing it out. It's about getting as much information out as possible, which is good for the American people, because whatever the outcome, and this is going to be difficult, we should be able to trust what happens in the legal system. And there are going to be tens of millions of Americans, no matter what happens, are not going to trust it. And that's on the DOJ and the FBI.
Well, yeah, because they have to apply this equally. I talked with Chairman of Judiciary Jim Jordan last hour on the Faulkner Focus. Here are his words.
The double standard, the American people have common sense. They see it for what. I mean, think about it. You got a classified document concern with Clinton, Biden, and Trump. So 3 people involved in the same thing, but only one gets prosecuted? How is that justice? How is that fairness? How is that equal application of the law? The 2 Democrats don't get prosecuted, but the Republican does? Tell me how that makes sense in our system where it's supposed to be equal treatment under the law. That is what's so frustrating to the country.
Carol?
Yeah, Jim Jordan was exactly right. There's a reason why Lady Justice has a blindfold on. So I think everyone sees this for what it is. I've said on this program before, there is a 2-tiered system of justice. And what makes me very upset is that this is ostensibly about national security. If the Biden administration actually cared about national security, there would not be Chinese police stations on our soil. The surveillance site in Cuba would not be in operation. The Chinese spy balloon would not have traversed just the continental United States transmitting real-time intelligence back to the CCP. So when I look at this, I worry that the average American is just going to see that data point. Trump compromised national security, when in reality, does this administration really care about national security?
I want to go to a different presidential candidate now, Vivek Ramaswamy, just to hear his words on what he would do if he were president. And now he wants a litmus test for all the other GOP candidates. Watch this.
The news media should be doing this. It is a shame that a competitor to Donald Trump in this election has to do the job of the political news media. Your job, if you have one, is to hold the U.S. government accountable for their lies. You do not take what they say at face value for the last 8 years when it was President Trump. Do not take their lies at face value now. But it is a shame that it takes a leader outside of the media to stand up.
Kaylee.
So politically, very smart move for Vivek Ramaswamy. He's putting the onus on all the other candidates, saying, hey, I'll pardon the former president. What will you guys do? Really smart play. We cited that polling yesterday about the vast majority of Republicans, I think it was to the tune of nearly 80% or higher, who said this either keeps their view of Trump the same or it improves their view. It might even be higher than 80%. So that, number one, smart move politically for Vivek. Number two, one thing he did that I'm so glad he did is he said, I want to FOIA the documents between the Justice Department and the White House. Because what did we talk about yesterday? I said, where's Merrick Garland? Where's Christopher Wray?
Right.
You have just indicted a former president of the United States, unprecedented, and the chief political opponent of your boss, Joe Biden. Merrick Garland reports to Joe Biden. Guess who the special counsel reports to? You can't call him an independent counsel. That statute's gone. He reports to Merrick Garland. I'm not saying that there needs to be a press conference. I understand you can't get into the details of a case.
I think there needs to be a press conference.
We need at least a statement.
Yeah.
We need something, not crickets. We've got crickets right now. Where are you?
Well, and you handle them every day at the White House. So there's a way to say, I can talk about that, I can't talk about that.
Exactly.
But there are some things that you could get on the record with this case. For instance, the FBI stonewalling on that Form 1023 rather, in that investigation into the Bidens and following the money trail with the bribery scheme. Are you able to do two things at once? Can you look at these things against Biden while you look at these things against Trump? Can you do two things at once?
And the thing is that when it comes to justice in this country, you have to. You know, in my view, it isn't enough to just say, you know, get their candidate, not ours, for either side. There has to be some kind of effort across the board. Clearly, this issue of documents is a problem and has been for both parties, people in both parties.
What do you mean, everybody? Mike Pence had them. He gave his back.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, Joe Biden took his papers when he was a senator. That's against the law, by the way.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Both sides have to find out what's been happening and clear it up on their own side, not just blame the other. But that does make it difficult for Trump, because if the issues in the indictment are true, then it, you know, and he also stonewalled, didn't he? You know, he could have sorted this out last summer.
Well, reportedly, they were coordinating. We weren't inside the house, but I think all of these men could have just given the papers back. I don't know what the records law says, though. Did they have to? And I think that's another point we have to get to. We have to get to the law and apply it equally, as Kara says.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.